Panama's promise to us has been broken, and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships.
Imagine a shocking discovery that threatens to reshape global trade and shift the balance of world power overnight. The Panama Canal, one of the most vital waterways on Earth, now stands on the brink of closure as the U.S. just uncovered a chilling conspiracy from its enemies, and at the same time, an unexpected disaster from the Caribbean has sent shockwaves towards the canal.
Hurricane Beryl has strengthened into a Category 5 hurricane. Several Caribbean nations are assessing the damage.
This isn't just another news. Everything is about to change. Ready to know the stakes in the region? Join us as we dive into the details. War on Panama. During his inaugural address, Donald Trump sent shockwaves across the world by declaring that China had secretly taken control of the Panama Canal. This crucial 51-mile waterway connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, allowing around 14,000 ships to pass each year. Without it, vessels would have to endure a grueling and costly journey around the southern tip of South America. But Trump's accusations weren't new. On Christmas Day, he had already taken to social media, claiming that Chinese soldiers were illegally running the canal and that he had proof to back these claims. Panamanian President José Raúl Mulino was swift to respond to these accusations and dismissed the claims as nonsense, insisting that Panama alone controlled the canal. On January 21st, he officially complained to the United Nations in response to Trump's comments. At the same time, Panamanian officials launched an investigation into two Hong Kong-based companies overseeing port operations along the canal. The following day, on January 22nd, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson M. Ning reiterated China's backing of Panama's stance. She stressed that China fully respects Panama's sovereignty, does not interfere in the canal's management, and acknowledges its status as a neutral international passage. Then Trump escalated things even further by stating that the U.S. would consider taking back the canal by force on the basis that American ships were being unfairly charged high fees. Panama's government fired back, making it clear no foreign power had any control over the canal. While the Panama Canal is managed solely by the Panama Canal Authority, concerns have been growing in Washington about China's increasing investments in Panama's infrastructure. And from a recent discovery, Trump's claims are indeed true. The grand plot. The controversy dates back to the 2016 expansion of the Panama Canal. On June 26, 2016, Panama held a grand ceremony to mark the official opening of the canal's expansion. The first ship to pass through was the COSCO Shipping Panama, a Chinese cargo vessel capable of carrying 9,400 containers. The ship had been renamed earlier that year for this special event and paid $586,000 in tolls for the honor of being the first to transit the expanded canal. The ceremony was attended by leaders from over 10 countries, delegates from 62 nations, and 15,000 Panamanians. Among the U.S. representatives were Jill Biden, the wife of then Vice President Joe Biden, and the American ambassador to Panama. At that time, Panama still had official diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Taiwan's newly elected president, Tsai Ing-wen, made Panama her first foreign visit and attended the event with her delegation. However, the choice of a Chinese ship for the inaugural transit carried a deeper meaning. It signified China's growing influence and appeared to challenge both the U.S. and Taiwan. The day after the ceremony, COSCO Shipping established two new companies in Panama. COSCO chairman Xu Lirong emphasized that the canal's expansion created fresh opportunities to access Central American markets. The move reflected China's broader strategy to strengthen its economic ties in the region, particularly in Panama, Central America, and the U.S. East Coast. Around the same time, in May 2016, China's Landbridge Group, in partnership with Shanghai Gorgeous, owned by Gang Guo, acquired control of Margarita Island Port for $900 million. This port, located at the Atlantic entrance of the Panama Canal, is the largest on the Atlantic side. Historically, Margarita Island was a U.S. military radio base. In 2013, Panama signed an agreement to develop the Panama Container Port project, but the site remained unused for years. Eventually, the Panamanian government reclaimed the land, citing inactivity. When Landbridge Corp stepped in, it was seen as a long-awaited investor for the stalled project. However, the deal raised questions about China's true intentions. China was already the second-largest user of the Panama Canal, and the expansion further boosted its advantages. Before the upgrade, the canal could only accommodate Panamax ships with a maximum capacity of 5,000 containers. The expansion allowed much larger new Panamax ships, capable of carrying up to 13,000 containers, to pass through, strengthening China's presence in global trade. This expansion was a major advantage for COSCO Shipping, whose fleet of new Panamax vessels could now pass through the canal without restrictions. China's trade representative in Panama at the time, Wang Weihua, said that the upgrade not only benefited Chinese shipping companies like COSCO, but also opened new doors for Chinese investments. In the years that followed, more than 20 Chinese companies, both state-owned and private, poured investments into Panama, expanding their presence in sectors such as finance, telecommunications, and services. Given the Panama Canal's crucial role in China's trade with the U.S. and Latin America, China has quietly expanded its investments and influence in Panama for years. Yet the world largely overlooked this geopolitical maneuver until both nations began revealing their true strategies. Fixing the puzzles. Under the Chinese Communist Party's strategic push, Panama cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan and officially recognized the People's Republic of China on January 12, 2017, just a year after the canal's expansion. In its statement, Panama affirmed its support for the One China policy, declaring Taiwan an inseparable part of Chinese territory. This marked a significant diplomatic win for China and signaled Panama's shift away from its previously neutral position. The announcement caught many by surprise. The U.S. ambassador to Panama at the time, John Faley, admitted he was informed only an hour before the news broke. Taiwan was also blindsided. However, signs of this shift had been in motion for some time. Just days before the official statement, on June 7, 2017, China's Landbridge Group held a groundbreaking ceremony for its Panama Container Port project. Then President Juan Carlos Varela attended the event, announcing a 750 million Chinese investment and calling it a major step in China-Panama relations. Landbridge Group Chairman Ya Chung stated that the port would be linked to facilities in China and Australia as part of the Belt and Road Initiative's maritime network. Every aspect of the project, design, construction, and management, was to be handled by Chinese firms. At the time, Panama had not yet established formal relations with China, nor had it joined the Belt and Road Initiative. Yet, the discussions and commitments already underway made it clear that deeper cooperation had been in the works long before the public announcement. By November 2017, President Varela visited China, signing several trade and economic agreements, making Panama the first Latin American nation to join the Belt and Road Initiative. He also approved land from a former U.S. Navy base in Amador, near the canal's Pacific entrance, for the construction of a new Chinese embassy, another sign of China's expanding presence in the region. On December 2018, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Panama, bringing 17 cooperation agreements. His reception was unlike anything seen before in Panama's modern history. Roads around his hotel were closed, and a special public holiday was declared for government offices and schools, measures unheard of for any foreign leader. This unusual alliance between the two nations initially felt like a serious threat to the U.S., prompting concerns of a national emergency. However, a major setback weakened the partnership, reducing its influence. As a result, the U.S. no longer saw an urgent need to respond. China failed silent takeover. China's efforts to expand its influence in Panama faced major setbacks despite years of strategic planning and investment. The Colon container port, once seen as a key project, failed. In June 2021, Panama's Maritime Authority exposed multiple contract violations by Land Bridge Group, including millions in unpaid land fees, failure to meet investment commitments, missing documents, and not hiring the required number of local workers. As a result, Panama revoked Land Bridge's lease, dealing a significant blow to China's ambitions in the region. Reports from Chinese media later revealed that Land Bridge Group was struggling with frozen assets and debts exceeding 20 billion yen. On top of that, the company's key investor, Gang Gu, was arrested in Shanghai in 2020 for illegal loan activities. What began as a high-profile overseas investment ultimately collapsed in scandal. But what the U.S. did not know was that even though the project failed, it had already served its purpose, strengthening ties between China and Panama, which led to Panama's eventual inclusion in the Belt and Road Initiative. After both countries established diplomatic relations in 2018, Chinese companies rapidly increased their presence in Panama. On July 27, 2018, Panama's Ministry of Public Works announced that a Chinese consortium made up of China Communications Construction Company and China Harbor Engineering Company had won the contract to build the fourth Panama Canal Bridge, a project valued at $1.52 billion and initially set for completion in August 2023. The bridge, designed for both road and rail use, spans 510 meters with a width of 51 meters and a height of 75 meters. Due to its complexity and strategic location, it attracted intense competition from global construction firms. However, the bidding process raised concerns when a European company with a higher score withdrew, accusing the Chinese firms of unethical practices. The Panamanian government later annulled the bid, citing irregularities, but after prolonged negotiations, the contract ultimately went to the Chinese companies. Delays in construction and design modifications pushed the official start date to August 27, 2024, more than a year after its original completion deadline. These setbacks also increased the project's total cost to $1.8 billion. Meanwhile, former Panamanian President Juan Carlos Varela faced corruption allegations. In 2019, he was removed from office amid scandals and later charged with money laundering in 2022. By July 2023, the U.S. State Department banned him from entering the U.S. due to his involvement in major corruption cases. Under Varela's leadership, Panama's infrastructure projects became a reflection of the challenges linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has often been criticized for encouraging corruption, promoting authoritarian influence, and creating debt burdens for participating countries. After Varela left office, many of his major projects were either scrapped or altered. However, by that time, China had already secured a strong presence in Panama. The hostile takeover. Major Chinese companies, such as Huawei, set up regional distribution centers in the Colon Free Trade Zone, while Chinese banks received operating licenses in the country. COSCO Shipping also expanded its reach by constructing large warehouses in the same zone and working with local maritime schools to provide training and donate equipment. The Colon Free Trade Zone, the world's second largest, offers significant tax advantages. Its location allows goods made there to bypass quota limits and benefit from lower tariffs when shipped to the US and the EU. Because of these benefits, many Chinese companies have set up overseas warehouses in the area. According to China's ambassador to Panama, more than 100 Chinese businesses now operate in the zone, making it a key hub for Chinese exports to 46 Latin American countries. As Western nations place stricter regulations on imported goods, Chinese companies are planning to build deep processing facilities in Panama to maintain access to these markets. Panama's laws allow investors in the free trade zone to apply for permanent residency with an investment of at least $250,000. This policy has drawn strong interest from Chinese business owners looking to gain Panamanian economic citizenship. Reports estimate that Panama now has a population of over 200,000 people of Chinese descent. China remains the top supplier of goods to the Colon Free Trade Zone and the second largest user of the Panama Canal. In 2023, imports into the zone reached nearly $100 billion, with 58% coming from mainland China. That same year, over 64 million tons of cargo moving through the Panama Canal were linked to China, making up 22% of total canal traffic. Trade between the two countries reached nearly $13 billion, making China Panama's biggest trading partner. In 2024, China's exports to Panama from January to October were valued at $10.6 billion, an 11.4% increase from the previous year. However, Panama's exports to China dropped sharply to just $74 million, a staggering 94.2% decline. This growing trade imbalance shows how Panama serves mainly as a shipping hub for China, providing little direct benefit to the local economy. With China's economy slowing and domestic infrastructure projects declining, many Chinese companies are expanding abroad. Currently, more than 40 Chinese firms operate in Panama, investing in various industries and leading construction projects. Notable projects include the Panama Convention Center, built by China State Construction, the Amador Cruise Terminal, developed by China Harbor Engineering, and the third bridge over the Panama Canal, designed and supervised by China Communications Construction. Re-emerging threat from the Panama-China relations. The Chinese Communist Party has strengthened its influence in Panama by providing training for more than 8,000 Panamanians in fields such as technology, agriculture, healthcare, artificial intelligence, media, and culture. Scholarships also encourage Panamanian students to study in China, while Confucius Institutes promote Chinese language and traditions. However, critics argue that these institutes serve as tools for spreading CCP propaganda and gathering intelligence. China's influence extends to its control over two key ports, Balboa on the Pacific coast and Cristobal on the Atlantic. Since 1997, these ports have been operated by Hutchison Port Holdings, a company based in Hong Kong and a subsidiary of CK Hutchison Holdings. According to Ryan Berg, director of the Americas program at the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies, overseeing these ports gives Hutchison access to crucial data on ships moving through the Panama Canal. As tensions between the U.S. and China grow, such information could become a strategic asset in supply chain disputes. Hong Kong, once semi-autonomous, has been under tighter Chinese control since its return from British rule in 1997. The situation worsened in 2020 with the introduction of the National Security Law, which further reduced its independence. Although CK Hutchison is technically a private company, Chinese laws require all businesses to cooperate with the government on national security matters. Given how broadly China defines national security, covering economic, geopolitical, and internal stability, CK Hutchison would likely comply with any request for sensitive shipping data. China's growing presence in Panama goes beyond ports. By establishing warehouses and manufacturing hubs in the Colon Free Trade Zone and acquiring land along the canal, Chinese firms have gained significant control over industries tied to canal operations. Their investments cover key sectors such as wind energy, power plants, water management, and port infrastructure. Some analysts claim that China has also built an extensive intelligence network in Panama, with ties to the Canal Authority, government agencies, business leaders, and media outlets. This could be why U.S. President Donald Trump suggested that China essentially controls the Panama Canal. But if the U.S. isn't ready to offer the same kind of help that China is providing, without the heavy debts and hidden costs China often demands, then why does Trump want control over the Panama Canal? Who does the canal truly belong to? And what right does the U.S. have to claim it? Building the canal. The dream of connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans seemed simple on paper, but the reality was brutal. The Panama Canal was not just a construction project, it was a battle against nature, disease, and death that the U.S. fought. Workers had to carve a passage through dense, snake-infested jungles where rain poured relentlessly, turning dirt into rivers of mud. The Chagres River, calm one moment, would explode into deadly rapids the next. The heat was suffocating, the humidity unbearable. Clothing never fully dried, and men woke up each morning to put on damp, sweat-soaked shirts from the day before. But the jungle wasn't the deadliest enemy. Tiny mosquitoes carried an invisible killer. Yellow fever and malaria swept through the workforce, striking men down by the thousands. Bodies were loaded onto trains like discarded cargo, carted away daily. One worker, Alfred Doughton, recalled the horror. "Death was our constant companion. I will never forget the trainloads of dead men being taken away as if they were nothing more than wood." The French were the first to attempt this impossible feat in 1818, led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the same man who had successfully built the Suez Canal. But this wasn't the Egyptian desert. The terrain was mountainous, and the rains were ceaseless. Mudslides buried workers alive, equipment was swallowed by floods, and disease wiped out entire teams. An estimated 20,000 men perished before the French abandoned the project in 1888. 16 years later, the Americans took over, determined to succeed where the French had failed. But they quickly faced the same horrors. The jungle remained merciless, the diseases just as deadly. Within a year, hundreds had died, and workers were fleeing in droves. The project's chief engineer, John Findlay Wallace, had seen enough. Before leaving, he ordered a metal coffin, intending to bring his own body back if he didn't survive. By the time he boarded his ship home, that coffin was filled, but not with him. It carried the body of one of his men. John F. Stevens, the man who took over the Panama Canal project, knew that disease was killing more workers than the construction itself. He put his trust in Dr. William Gorgas, a yellow fever survivor who had discovered the true enemy, mosquitoes. For centuries, people had believed that foul air and rotting waste caused deadly fevers, but Gorgas proved it was the tiny insects lurking in pools of stagnant water. Gorgas launched a war against them. Homes were fumigated, every puddle was drained, and windows were sealed with screens. Health officials doused water sources with a suffocating mix of oil and kerosene to choke out mosquito larvae. By the end of 1905, yellow fever had all but disappeared from the canal zone. Malaria, however, refused to go down without a fight. By 1906, nearly 80% of workers had been hospitalized at least once. Still, without Gorgas, thousands more would have died. But disease wasn't the only killer. As sickness faded, accidents became the new death sentence. Nowhere was more dangerous than Culebra Cut, an 8-mile stretch of mountains that workers had to carve through to make way for the canal. It was called Hell's Gorge for a reason. Giant steam shovels groaned under the heat, locomotives screamed through the valley, and explosions shook the ground every day. 60 million pounds of dynamite were used to blast apart the mountains, but in the suffocating tropical heat, some charges ignited too early. One December day in 1908, an explosion ripped through the worksite, killing 23 men in an instant. Others drowned, got electrocuted, or were crushed by collapsing rock. The land itself seemed cursed. Entire sections of the canal, months or even years of labor, could be erased in seconds by sudden landslides. One American official summed up the horror, Everything you built could vanish in an instant. For workers on the Panama Canal, every day was a gamble with death. Malaria was a constant threat, and the bitter quinine used to fight it came with a deadly side effect: partial deafness. In a place where roaring trains and exploding dynamite were everywhere, losing your hearing could be fatal. Workers who couldn't hear an oncoming train often never saw it coming. George Hodges, a survivor of the canal project, recalled watching a man fall while trying to hop onto a moving train. Before anyone could react, the wheels of another train sliced him clean in half, like a machete chopping through flesh. Laborer Antonio Sanchez compared working in the Culebra Cut to stepping onto a battlefield. Hospitals overflowed with men who had lost limbs in gruesome accidents, and so many workers needed amputations that prosthetic limb companies rushed to sign contracts with the canal builders. One manufacturer, A.A. Marks, bragged that its waterproof artificial arms and legs were the only ones tough enough to handle Panama's brutal conditions. The demand was so high that injured men were fitted with new limbs and sent straight back to work. Between 1904 and 1913, almost 6,000 workers lost their lives under American control. If you counted those who died under the failed French attempt, the toll climbed even higher: 500 deaths for every mile of canal built. The Panama Canal wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a graveyard carved through the jungle. The fight for the canal didn't end when construction did. The United States, having seized the project after the French failed, controlled the passage from 1914 onward. It was a powerful gateway linking the Atlantic and Pacific, making global trade faster and warships deadlier. But U.S. control came at a cost. Locals were locked out, tensions flared, and a wall went up between the Canal Zone and Panama City. By 1964, anger exploded into violence. Protests turned into bloodshed, leading to the loss of 28 lives and forcing the U.S. to rethink its grip on the canal. It took years of pressure, and in 1977, President Jimmy Carter signed a treaty to hand the canal back to Panama. Even then, the U.S. reserved the right to use force if its neutrality was ever threatened. After a rocky transition, including a U.S. invasion to oust military ruler Manuel Noriega, Panama finally took full control in 1999. Today, the Panama Canal is entirely in Panamanian hands, run by the Panama Canal Authority. But its history is drenched in sweat, blood, and sacrifice of Americans. Still, is this enough reason to take it back? Reclaiming the canal. Reclaiming the Panama Canal would bring nothing but trouble for the U.S. In fact, since handing it over in 1999 for strategic reasons, the move has proven to be a wise decision with lasting benefits. Taking it now wouldn't just be pointless, it would backfire. Panama sees the canal as a core part of its national identity. A U.S. invasion would devastate its reputation in Latin America, strain alliances, and drive Panama closer to China, strengthening the very influence the U.S. hopes to contain. Instead of military action, the wiser approach is to support Panama's stability and maintain strong ties with this crucial ally. The U.S. didn't give up the canal on a whim. It was a calculated move to neutralize serious threats. One of the biggest concerns was anti-imperialist sentiment. After World War II, decolonization swept the world, and the Panama Canal Zone, where the U.S. ruled like a colonial power, became a glaring target. Panamanians saw their land sliced in two by a foreign power while gaining little in return. Tensions exploded in 1964 when Panamanian students stormed the Canal Zone, raising their national flag in defiance. The crackdown that followed led to the passing of 20 Panamanians and 4 U.S. soldiers. Panama still marks that day as Dia de los Mártires, Martyrs' Day. The bloodshed ignited a diplomatic crisis and fueled demands for change. The second concern was the spread of guerrilla movements. In the 1960s and 70s, Latin America was boiling with guerrilla movements, many fueled by the Cuban Revolution. These groups, including those in neighboring Colombia and Nicaragua, weren't just leftist. They saw themselves as freedom fighters pushing back against U.S. control. The Soviet Union capitalized on this, condemning the U.S. as a colonial oppressor in Panama. Then came the biggest challenge, a military dictatorship in Panama. In 1963, General Omar Torrijos took power, aligning himself with leftist movements and even communist Cuba. But his main obsession was the Panama Canal. He was willing to go to extremes, reportedly plotting to sabotage the canal with explosives if the U.S. refused to hand it over. He even considered launching a guerrilla war inside the canal zone. By the early 1970s, the U.S. recognized the growing danger. This led to the Torrijos-Carter treaties in 1977, which guaranteed that the canal would be handed over in 1999. The move wasn't just about diplomacy, it was a calculated strategy. By giving up the canal zone, the U.S. neutralized one of the strongest anti-American arguments in the region. The treaties undercut Soviet propaganda, reduced tensions, and ensured the canal's neutrality. The aftermath proved the strategy worked. Although Panama went through turmoil, especially under Manuel Noriega, who turned against the U.S., the country stabilized after a 1989 U.S. intervention that Panamanians largely supported. Unlike a colonial grab, that intervention was about restoring democracy, and it worked. Trying to take back the canal now would undo decades of progress, reviving old threats and creating new ones. Losing an ally. Today, Panama stands as a strong U.S. ally. Even under leftist governments, it backs Washington's policies, refusing to recognize Nicolas Maduro as Venezuela's leader. With President José Raúl Mulino now in power, Panama remains aligned with U.S. interests, tackling issues like illegal migration. Unlike many of its neighbors, Panama isn't a source of mass migration. Why? Because its economy is thriving. For decades, Panama has outpaced most of Latin America in economic growth, boasting the highest GDP per capita in the region. With prosperity at home, Panamanians have little reason to flee. A huge part of this success comes from the way Panama runs the canal. Since taking full control in 1999, the country has managed the canal with remarkable efficiency. The government ensured its independence by giving the Panama Canal Authority full autonomy, shielding it from political corruption. Unlike many state-run businesses in Latin America, the ACP is led by skilled professionals who improve operations beyond what the U.S. has achieved. Accidents dropped, transit times improved, and in 2016, Panama invested billions to expand the canal, securing its future as a global trade hub. The U.S., as the biggest user, reaps the benefits, without the burden of colonial rule. Some claim Panama overcharges American ships, but that ignores the reality. Running the canal is complex, requiring massive amounts of fresh water. In 2023, a severe drought forced Panama to limit daily transit. To keep goods moving, ships could pay extra to bypass the wait, a fair system applied to all nations. The idea that Panama is exploiting the U.S. is nothing more than a political talking point. Trying to take back the canal would be a disaster. To Panama, the canal isn't just infrastructure. It's the core of its national identity. An unprovoked invasion would spark outrage across Latin America, turning the U.S. into a villain overnight. Worse, it would hand China the perfect excuse to expand its influence. While many in the region remain wary of Beijing, a reckless U.S. move would push Panama, and possibly others, straight into China's orbit. If America truly wants to counter China and reduce migration, its smartest play isn't to seize the canal, it's to support Panama's success. But reckless threats only alienate an important ally. Instead of saber-rattling, the U.S. should focus on keeping Panama strong and on its side. Tragically, the U.S. isn't the only threat to the canal today. Nature itself is also putting it at risk. Withstanding nature. A massive 7.6 earthquake struck the heart of the Caribbean Sea on Saturday night, triggering tsunami warnings and sparking fears across the region. But as the immediate danger passed, a much bigger question emerged. Could an even stronger quake threaten the Panama Canal? To understand the risks, we need to look at how earthquakes work. When tectonic plates shift, they unleash powerful seismic waves that ripple outward. The first to arrive are primary waves, fast and forceful, but not the most destructive. The real danger lies in the secondary waves that follow, bringing intense shaking that can crack even the strongest structures. Worst of all are surface waves, which roll through the ground like a deadly ripple effect, targeting weaknesses in massive infrastructures like the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal wasn't built to fail. Engineers have spent years reinforcing it, using stronger materials, flexible joints to absorb shock, and deep foundations to keep it steady. In 2016, the expansion project introduced cutting-edge upgrades, including advanced sensors that detect even the slightest ground movements, giving early warnings before disaster strikes. But no matter how well it's built, no structure is completely safe from the raw power of nature. Panama may not sit on the infamous Pacific Ring of Fire, but that doesn't mean it's free from danger. The land beneath it hides a network of fault lines capable of producing devastating earthquakes. One major threat comes from the Panama Fracture Zone, a violent fault system off the Pacific coast. Here, tectonic plates grind against each other, unleashing powerful horizontal shockwaves. These quakes don't always cause massive vertical shifts like subduction zones, but they pack enough force to cripple structures unprepared for their impact. To the north, beneath the Caribbean Sea, lies another danger: the South Caribbean Deformed Belt. This hidden seismic zone can produce both deep and shallow earthquakes, each with its own destructive power. The 1991 Lyman earthquake, which shook Costa Rica and was felt strongly in Panama, was a brutal reminder of what's possible. Now, if a hypothetical magnitude 8.0 earthquake strikes near the canal, ripping through one of these fault lines, the ground would convulse, sending violent shock waves racing through rock and sediment. The canal's mighty walls, its steel gates, its reinforced foundations, everything would be put to the ultimate test. Under extreme conditions, even the mighty concrete locks, the heart of the Panama Canal, could start to crack under relentless pressure. If they fail, millions of gallons of water from Gatun Lake, the reservoir that powers the canal, could surge uncontrollably. Without this water, the locks would become useless, trapping thousands of ships and choking global trade in an instant. But the destruction wouldn't stop there. The violent shaking could rip apart the steep embankments flanking the canal, triggering massive landslides. Tons of earth and rock could crash into the waterway, blocking passage and burying critical infrastructure beneath rubble. Repair crews would be racing against time, but clearing the wreckage wouldn't be easy, not with the canal paralyzed and chaos spreading across supply chains worldwide. And then there's an even greater nightmare: a tsunami. If the earthquake strikes offshore on the Caribbean side, the ocean could rise with terrifying force, sending a massive surge of water toward the canal zone. Even if the tsunami doesn't destroy the locks outright, it could flood key facilities, erode embankments, and cripple nearby ports. The canal wouldn't just be damaged, it would be cut off from the world. The consequences would be staggering. The canal will be inoperable for weeks or even months. Ships will be forced to take longer, costlier routes. Fuel prices would spike. Shipping costs would skyrocket. Factories waiting for raw materials would grind to a halt. Energy supplies would shrink. From food shipments to electronics, industries across continents would feel the aftermath of a disaster in Panama. Millions of people would feel the impact, from factory workers in Asia to consumers in Europe and truck drivers in America. But beyond the economy, there's a deeper human story. For Panama, the canal is more than just a waterway. It's a symbol of national pride, a lifeline for thousands, and proof of human determination. The thought that a single earthquake could cripple something so vital is unsettling. It's a harsh reminder that no matter how advanced our engineering, nature still holds the upper hand. Beyond the looming threats of geopolitical tensions and natural disasters, the canal has also revealed shocking discoveries, ones that, while not life-threatening, are no less astonishing. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.